They're listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and share with your friends and family.
There's a certain magic to a cozy autumn day, isn't there? The smell of cinnamon and applewood smoke, the way the golden light slants through the window, the feeling of being safe and warm inside while the world outside turns crisp and cold. For Ilara, these days were a cherished ritual. A perfect cup of tea, a soft blanket, a good book. But this particular October afternoon held a different kind of magic. A package arrived on her doorstep. No postage, no return address. Just her name, written in elegant, looping script. Inside, nestled in tissue paper the color of autumn leaves, was a small, hand-carved figurine. A little wooden fox, its expression clever and kind. And a note, a friend for your hearth. He'll keep you company. It was charming. A little mysterious, perhaps, but a delightful secret. She placed the fox on the mantelpiece, right beside a flickering, orange-scented candle. She didn't notice, at first, how the shadows in the room seemed to deepen around it, how they clung to the wooden figure like a loyal pet. Because the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones that howl in the night. They're the ones that bring you peace, right before they ask for something in return. At first, the change was wonderful. Ilara's cozy home became, more so. The fire never seemed to die down. Her tea stayed perfectly warm for hours. The book she was reading became utterly engrossing, as if the story were writing itself just for her. She felt a profound, deep sense of contentment. She attributed it to the season, to her own good fortune. But then, small things began to happen. Things that should have been impossible. She'd wish aloud for a specific type of biscuit to have with her tea, and moments later, the doorbell would ring, a delivery driver with a box from her favorite bakery downtown, paid for anonymously. She'd feel a slight chill, and the thermostat would click on all by itself. And the shadows, they began to move. Not in a scary way. In a helpful, domestic way. A shadow would stretch out from the corner of the room to pull a blanket over her legs as she dozed off. Another would gently nudge a book she dropped back onto the side table. The little wooden fox on the mantel seemed to watch it all, its carved smile seeming a little wider, a little more knowing. Ilara wasn't afraid. She felt, cherished. Protected. She had a silent, invisible companion. It was the coziest she had ever felt in her life. And that was the trap. Because such perfect peace always has a cost. The first request was so small, it was almost nothing. Ilara was reading a particularly thrilling chapter of her book. The protagonist was about to open a mysterious door. Don't stop. Read a little longer. The voice was soothing, seamless. Ilara, enthralled, read on for another hour, forgetting her dinner in the oven. It was a small thing. The next request was a little bigger. A man came to read the gas meter. He was perfectly pleasant. But the shadows in the hallway coiled tightly, protectively. He doesn't belong here. Send him away. A cold dread, entirely separate from her own feelings, washed over Ilara. She made an excuse and sent the man away, her heart pounding. The moment the door closed, the cozy warmth returned, the shadows nuzzled against her like a cat. The relief was immense. She had pleased it. The wooden fox's eyes seemed to gleam in the candlelight. The cost of this perfect, cozy life was her autonomy. Her peace was becoming a prison. The outside world was being framed as a threat, and her protector was becoming her warden. The final request came on a stormy night. Her best friend, Maya, was supposed to visit. They'd had a silly argument the week before, and this was their reconciliation. Elara was looking forward to it. But as the time approached, the atmosphere in the house changed. The cozy warmth turned stifling. The friendly shadows grew long and sharp. She will break the peace. She doesn't understand this place. Tell her not to come. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. The cozy illusion shattered. Elara saw her situation for what it was, not a blessing, but a beautiful captivity. This entity, this spirit of the hearth, loved her, but its love was possessive and absolute. It would isolate her completely to keep her safe. Terrified, but defiant, Elara did not call Maya. Instead, she went to the mantelpiece and picked up the wooden fox. I know you're in here. You've been so kind. You've given me such peace. But this is my home. And my life. You cannot have my friends. You cannot have me. She didn't throw it. She didn't destroy it. She held it gently and walked to her front door. She opened it to the cold, windy, real night. Thank you for your company. But you have to go now. She placed the wooden fox on the porch step and closed the door. Inside, the house was suddenly just a house. The fire was just a fire. The shadows were just shadows. The oppressive, cozy warmth was gone, replaced by a natural chill. She was alone. And for the first time in weeks, she was truly at peace. The next morning, the wooden fox was gone. In its place on the step was a single, perfect, autumn leaf. Elara's life returned to normal. Cozy, but authentically so. Sometimes, on a particularly quiet afternoon, she might see a shadow linger for a moment too long out of the corner of her eye, or feel a sudden, warm draft. But it never felt possessive again. It felt respectful. Like a former guest checking in, happy to see she's well. She hadn't defeated a monster. She had set a boundary with a lonely, powerful spirit that had forgotten how to love without controlling. And in doing so, she reclaimed her home and her peace. So the next time you feel a little too cozy, a little too content, ask yourself. Is it the season? Or is it something else, something watching from the corner, waiting for you to let your guard down? What kindness in your life might be asking for a little too much in return? Tell me in the comments below. And make sure you're subscribed. Because in the next story, we're exploring a different kind of cozy horror. We're investigating the knitting pattern. A pattern found in an old attic that, when completed, doesn't make a sweater, it makes a perfect, tiny, breathing replica of someone you've lost. The case of the Echo Mittens. What happens when you try to put them on? Until then, stoke your fires. Enjoy your tea. And maybe, just maybe, keep a light on in the hall. There is a special kind of magic in creating something with your own two hands. The click of knitting needles, the soft pull of yarn, the gradual emergence of a pattern into something warm and tangible. For Clara, a retired librarian, knitting was her peace. Her meditation. A way to stitch comfort into the world, one row at a time. Her latest project came from a pattern she found in a dusty box in her grandmother's attic. It was tucked inside an old journal, written on a fragile, yellowed page. The pattern was titled simply, The Echo Mittens. The instructions were unusual, calling for a specific, nearly forgotten type of wool and silk blend and suggesting the knitter focus on a cherished memory with every stitch. It was charming. A little eccentric, perhaps, but Clara loved the romance of it. She gathered the materials, settled into her favorite armchair by the window overlooking her autumn garden, and began to knit. She thought of her late husband, Arthur, his laugh, the way his hand felt in hers. With every stitch, she poured her love, her grief, her longing into the growing form of the mitten. She didn't notice, at first, how the wool seemed to grow warmer in her hands. How the stitches sometimes seemed to form on their own, guided by an invisible hand. She was too wrapped up in the cozy, comforting rhythm of creation. Because the most dangerous creations aren't monsters under the bed. They're the ones we make with love, and leave unfinished. As the first mitten took shape, Clara's quiet home felt less empty. The old floorboards would creak in a familiar, comforting rhythm, the same three-step pattern Arthur would use when he'd bring her tea. She'd catch the faint, beloved scent of his pipe tobacco in the air, though he'd been gone for 5 years. She chalked it up to memory, to wishful thinking. The power of suggestion from the strange pattern. But the sensations grew stronger. One evening, as she was knitting the thumb of the first mitten, she felt a distinct, gentle pressure on the empty cushion beside her. As if someone had just sat down. The second mitten went faster. It felt like the yarn was guiding her hands. The cozy, domestic echoes became more pronounced. A book she'd left on the side table would be moved to the shelf. The radio would softly click on, tuned to Arthur's favorite jazz station. The mittens, sitting side by side on the coffee table, looked perfectly ordinary. Yet, they seemed to radiate a gentle warmth. A presence. Clara wasn't frightened. She felt a profound, aching sense of companionship. It felt like a miracle. A way to have a piece of him back. And that was the danger. The pattern wasn't creating a garment. It was weaving a ghost. The moment Clara finished the final stitch, weaving in the last end of yarn, the feeling in the room shifted. The cozy echoes solidified. She picked up one of the mittens. It was warm. And then, she heard it. Not a sound in the room, but a sound in her mind. Clear as day. My Clara. You always did have cold hands. She dropped the mitten as if it had burned her. It was his voice. Not a memory, but a communication. The mittens weren't just imbued with her memory, they had become a vessel for it. They had given her echo a voice. It was wonderful. It was terrifying. She found herself spending hours just holding them, having one-sided conversations, basking in the echo of his presence. Her real life began to fade. Why see friends when she could sit with the echo of her husband? Why go outside when everything she wanted was right there, in her hands? The cozy dream was becoming a beautiful trap. The pattern had promised a cherished memory, but it was delivering a prison of the past. The echo was perfect, and therefore, it was stagnant. It could never grow, never change, never argue. It was a record on a loop, and it was asking her to join it. The breaking point came when her daughter visited. Clara, lost in her conversation with the echo, barely looked up. Her daughter, worried, reached for the mittens. She doesn't understand. We don't need anyone else. A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather filled the room. Clara felt a surge of irrational anger toward her own daughter. It was the echo's emotion, not hers, but it felt so real. In that moment, Clara saw the truth. This wasn't Arthur. Arthur loved their daughter. This was a possessive, frozen snapshot of her memory, and it was trying to isolate her to keep itself alive. With a cry that was both grief and determination, Clara snatched up the mittens. She didn't destroy them. She found the final, loose end of yarn she had woven in. She pulled it. She didn't unravel them completely. She just dropped one single, crucial stitch from the center of the palm. The pattern broke. The presence in the room didn't vanish with a scream, but with a sigh. A gentle, grateful exhalation. The oppressive, possessive warmth lifted, leaving behind only the genuine, gentle memory of her husband. The mittens were just mittens again. Beautiful, warm, and silent. Clara placed the slightly unraveled mittens in Arthur's old chest in the attic. They were a testament to her love, but also a warning. Some echoes are meant to be cherished, not conjured. Some patterns are best left unfinished. She went downstairs and made a pot of tea with her daughter. The house felt like her own again. Quiet, but alive with possibility. The past was a place to visit, not a place to live. She hadn't defeated a ghost. She had chosen the messy, unpredictable present over a perfect, frozen past. And in doing so, she freed herself. There is a special kind of magic in an old family recipe. It's more than just instructions, it's a story. A pinch of memory, a dash of tradition, all simmering together to create something that feeds more than just the body. For Leo, a quiet, solitary man who found peace in the rhythm of his kitchen, cooking was his connection to a past he never knew. His latest discovery was a recipe box found in the basement of the old house he'd inherited from his great-aunt. It was made of dark, fragrant cedar, and the cards inside were handwritten in a dozen different scripts, stained with decades of love and spills. One card, tucked at the very bottom, caught his eye. It was titled simply, Comfort Stew. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and the instructions were unusual. Use the silver pot, it read. And stir with intention. It was charming. A little mysterious, perhaps, but Leo loved the ritual of it. He gathered the ingredients, simple, humble vegetables, a tough cut of meat that would need time to become tender. He used the old, heavy silver pot he'd found with the box. As he chopped and stirred, he didn't just focus on the recipe, he wondered about the woman who wrote it. What was her life like? What comfort was she seeking? He didn't notice, at first, how the steam from the pot seemed to carry more than just the smell of herbs and broth. How the warmth that filled his small kitchen felt, emotional. Heavy. He was too wrapped up in the cozy, methodical ritual of cooking. Because the most dangerous meals aren't the ones that are poisoned. They're the ones that are haunted. As the stew simmered, the atmosphere in Leo's home changed. The cozy, solitary silence was replaced by a profound, aching loneliness. It wasn't his own. It felt imported. It was a deep, resonant sadness that seemed to seep from the pot itself, misting the windows and settling in the corners of the room. He chalked it up to the gray weather, to the melancholy of autumn. But when he finally ladled the stew into a bowl and took his first taste, it wasn't just flavors that filled his mouth. It was a feeling. A wave of grief, so sharp and specific it stole his breath, washed over him. It was the grief of a last goodbye. The grief of empty rooms and a silence that would never again be filled by a particular laugh. Tears streamed down his face, but they weren't his tears. They belonged to the memory cooked into the food. The stew itself was delicious, hearty, rich, perfect. But it was a Trojan horse. The comfort it offered was a trap door into someone else's sorrow. He was not just eating a meal, he was consuming a ghost's heartbreak. Leo, a man of science and method, was fascinated. He wasn't frightened, he was obsessed. He had to understand. He made the stew again the next day. And again. Each time, the emotional echo was the same, that initial, devastating wave of grief, followed by a long, deep, resilient sadness. It was the story of learning to live with loss. He began to experiment. He discovered that if he focused on a specific question while stirring, what was her name? The feeling would shift, offering a new nuance. He felt a name, Eleanor. If he asked, "What did you lose?" the taste of the stew would change, carrying the distinct, metallic tang of a wartime telegram and the scent of old roses. He wasn't just cooking anymore. He was conducting a séance with spices and a silver pot. He was piecing together the story of Eleanor, a woman who had cooked her bottomless grief into this recipe, creating a perfect, preserved echo of her love and her loss. The cozy kitchen had become an archive of anguish. The breaking point came when Leo realized he was starting to prefer Eleanor's memories to his own. His own life felt bland, colorless, compared to the epic, tragic romance of her past. He was becoming a vessel for her sorrow, and he was starting to forget how to feel his own feelings. He knew he had to stop. But he couldn't just throw the recipe away. That felt like discarding Eleanor herself. She had poured her truth into this stew, she deserved to be heard, and then, to be released. He decided to make it one last time. But this time, he would add a new ingredient. As the stew simmered, and the familiar grief began to fog the windows, he spoke to her. He told her about his own small sorrows, his own quiet joys. He thanked her for her story. He acknowledged her pain. And then, he offered her a new memory to taste, the feeling of peace. He stirred in not a spice, but an intention, let go. The steam rising from the pot changed. The heavy, gray sadness lightened, turning gold. The taste of the stew transformed on his tongue. The profound grief was still there, but it was now wrapped in something else, acceptance. Gratitude. The love remained, but the loss had finally, after decades, settled. The sorrowful stew was now just stew. A beautiful, comforting, and quiet meal. The ghost in the recipe had been heard, and had finally found peace. Leo copied the original recipe onto a new card. On the back, he wrote what he had learned: stir in your own peace before serving. He placed it back in the cedar box. The old, heavy silver pot lost its strange weight, becoming just a pot. He hadn't destroyed a haunted recipe. He had finished it. He had provided the one ingredient the original cook couldn't find, an end to the story. There is a profound comfort in a well-loved quilt. The weight of it. The history stitched into every patch. For Maya, a historian who found solace in the stories of the past, the quilt was her greatest inheritance. It arrived after her grandmother's passing, folded neatly in a wicker trunk. It was called the Reconciliation Quilt, a masterpiece of intricate stitching, each patch a different fabric, a scrap of a wedding dress, a piece of a military uniform, a fragment of a child's well-loved blanket. The note with it was simple: in her grandmother's elegant hand, this quilt mends what is broken. Sleep under it, and find peace. It was a beautiful sentiment. That first night, Maya spread the quilt over her bed. The weight was immense, but comforting, like a firm, loving embrace. She fell into the deepest, most profound sleep of her life. She didn't dream her own dreams. She dreamed of a young bride, her hands trembling as she sewed her dress. She dreamed of a soldier in a muddy trench, writing a letter by flickering candlelight. She dreamed of a child, crying for a lost blanket. The dreams were vivid, emotional, but they felt resolved. Finished. She woke feeling not tired, but oddly unburdened, as if she'd helped carry a weight for someone else. It felt like a miracle. A way to heal the echoes of the past. And that was the lure. Because some stitches don't just mend fabric, they suture shut doors that were never meant to be opened. Because the most dangerous dreams aren't nightmares. They're the ones that feel like peace, right before they pull you under. Night after night, Maya returned to the quilt. Each sleep was a journey into a resolved trauma, a finished story. She felt a righteous purpose, a cozy sense of being a silent witness for those who could no longer speak. The quilt, she believed, was a historian's ultimate tool, not just reading about the past, but experiencing its conclusion. But the quilt was hungry. It had been dormant for years, and now it had a willing participant. The dreams began to change. They became more frequent, bleeding into her waking hours. She'd catch a whiff of trench mud on a clean street, hear the echo of a child's sob in a silent library. The resolved stories were replaced by unresolved ones. A woman staring at an empty cradle. A man lost in a blizzard, his hope fading. The quilt wasn't just showing her finished stories anymore, it was showing her loops. Traumas stuck on repeat. And it was asking her to stay. To keep them company. The cozy weight of the quilt began to feel oppressive. The loving embrace became a grip. She was no longer a witness, she was becoming an anchor, a battery of waking consciousness for dreams that refused to end. The peace it offered was the peace of surrender, of giving yourself over to someone else's endless night. Desperate, Maya took the quilt to a textile conservator. Under ultraviolet light, the true pattern revealed itself. The beautiful, swirling stitches weren't just decorative. They formed a complex, hypnotic sigil, a locking mechanism. Each patch wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was a token, a spiritual anchor holding a soul's most powerful memory. The quilt wasn't a record of resolved trauma. It was a prison for unresolved pain. Her grandmother hadn't been a simple quilter. She had been a kind warden, a woman who could not bear to see suffering, so she captured it, contained it in this beautiful, terrible tapestry, and slept under it herself to provide the comfort these trapped echoes could not find for themselves. She had shouldered their pain until her death. And now, she had passed the duty to Maya. The quilt wasn't evil. It was a failed act of mercy. It believed that by containing pain, it could control it. It didn't understand that pain needs to be released, not archived. Maya realized she had two choices. She could continue her grandmother's work, slowly allowing herself to be drained by the quilt's endless hunger for comfort, becoming a ghost in her own life. Or she could do the far more difficult thing, she could unravel it. Maya didn't destroy the quilt. She took it to the quiet chapel her grandmother had loved. She laid it out on a pew, the morning sun streaming through stained glass windows, illuminating the countless patches. She didn't have a ritual or a spell. She had only truth and acknowledgement. One by one, she touched the patches. I see you, James. You are not lost. You are remembered. The soldier's patch grew warm, then cool, the fabric seeming to sigh. I see you, Eleanor. Your child was loved. Your love remains. The patch from the baby's blanket softened, the frantic energy within it settling into peace. She went through them all. The lonely, the heartbroken, the terrified. She didn't try to fix their stories. She simply bore witness to their truth and released them from their duty to be remembered so perfectly, so painfully. As she did, the stitches of the sigil began to loosen on their own. Threads pulled free, not with a snap, but with a sound like a gentle sigh. The oppressive weight of the quilt lightened. The colors of the patches, once vibrant with trapped emotion, faded to the soft, gentle hues of old, well-loved cloth. The quilt was becoming just a quilt. A beautiful, complicated testament to her grandmother's immense compassion and her terrible mistake. Maya folded the now quiet quilt and placed it back in the trunk. It was no longer a prison. It was a memorial. She had not defeated a cursed object. She had completed her grandmother's work, not by containing pain, but by finally, after generations, setting it free. She had learned that some histories are too heavy to keep. That true peace isn't found in preserving the past, but in laying it gently to rest. There's a certain magic to flea markets, isn't there? The smell of old paper and polished wood, the thrill of the hunt, the possibility that amidst the clutter of forgotten lives, you might find a treasure. For Ben, a clockmaker whose world was built on the reliable logic of gears and springs, these markets were a pilgrimage. He sought the broken, the unwound, the silent, timepieces waiting for his skilled hands to grant them a voice once more. On an autumn Saturday, under a sky the color of faded denim, he found it. Tucked between a stack of yellowed National Geographics and a chipped ceramic owl was a music box. It was unlike any he'd ever seen. Hand-carved from a single piece of walnut, so dark it seemed to drink the light. Inlaid across its lid was a constellation of mother-of-pearl, a swirling galaxy of abalone and pearl that seemed to shift when looked at from the corner of the eye. There was no maker's mark, no price tag. Just a single, small, silver key. The old woman running the stall saw his interest. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, seemed to look through him. "It plays a unique tune," she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "A lullaby for the restless. It's been waiting for the right listener." She sold it to him for a $5 bill, closing his fingers over the money with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Wind it at dusk," she whispered. "That's when the world is best at listening." That night, as the sun bled orange into purple behind the city skyline, Ben placed the box on his workbench. He inserted the key. The resistance was smooth, perfect. He turned it. Once. Twice. 3 times. The melody filled his workshop. It was a lullaby, but one from a dream. It spoke of moonlit paths and whispered secrets, of joy remembered and sorrow accepted. As it played, Ben felt a warmth spread through him, a peace so deep it felt like coming home. He slept at his bench, his head cradled in his arms, and his dreams were of quiet, star-filled skies. He didn't know that across the city, in the pediatric ward of St. Jude's, a little girl named Lily, unresponsive for 3 weeks after a car accident, laughed softly in her sleep and her fingers twitched. And in a quiet apartment overlooking the river, an elderly veteran named Arthur, who had carried the ghost of his best friend for 50 years, finally laid his head down and wept, the weight in his chest lifting just enough to let him breathe. The music box wasn't playing a song. It was conducting a symphony of balance. And for every note of peace it composed, it required a note of pain to complete the chord. Because the most beautiful music often has the most dissonant origins. And someone, somewhere, is always providing the harmony. Ben, a man who believed in cause and effect, in the tangible click of a gear engaging, initially dismissed the strange coincidences. The day after he wound the box, he read 2 small articles in the local paper. One was a heartwarming piece about Lily's miraculous awakening, her first word being music. The other was a brief notice about a fire in a historic downtown building. No one was hurt, but a beloved family-owned bakery, institution for 40 years, was gutted. The owner, a man named Marco, was heartbroken, his life's work was ashes. A coincidence, Ben thought. But the mechanic in him, the part that needed to understand how things worked, was intrigued. He began a journal. He wound the box every dusk and meticulously recorded the events of the following day. The pattern was undeniable, and it was chilling. A student aces a difficult exam they were sure they'd failed, an artist across town has a breakthrough, selling a painting that had languished for years, and that same day, a pipe bursts in the city archives, destroying irreplaceable historical documents. A couple on the brink of divorce spontaneously reconciles, a long-missing dog finds its way home, and a community garden, a sanctuary for many, is vandalized beyond repair. The music box was an engine of emotional thermodynamics. It didn't create joy, it redistributed it. It siphoned moments of potential sorrow and converted them into concentrated moments of bliss, and vice versa. It was a cosmic scale, and it was brutally, perfectly efficient. Ben's initial peace curdled into a low-grade constant anxiety. The cozy warmth the box provided now felt like a transaction. His comfort was purchased with someone else's despair. He was living in a beautiful house built on a foundation of other people's ruins. He tried to stop. He locked the music box in the heavy iron safe where he kept his most valuable tools. For 2 days, the silence in his apartment was absolute, and it was deafening. The world felt sharp, unfiltered. The news was a relentless barrage of undiluted tragedy. A minor argument with a supplier felt like a catastrophic failure. The peace the box had provided was an addiction, and he was in withdrawal. He found himself pacing in front of the safe, the key burning a hole in his pocket. His own life felt gray and unbalanced without the box's influence. He thought of his sister, Sarah, and her husband. Their years of struggle with infertility, the fading hope in their eyes at family gatherings. With a tremor of shame and desperate hope, he unlocked the safe. The melody felt like a bomb, the warmth returning instantly. He focused on his wish for them, pouring his intention into the turning key. Let them be happy. The next day, Sarah called, her voice breathless with tears of joy. She was pregnant. It was early, but the doctor was optimistic. It was a miracle. Ben's own joy was immediately tempered by a cold dread. He scoured the news, his heart pounding. He found it. A young couple, new to the city, had been driving home from the hospital with their newborn. A black ice patch, a skid, a collision with a guardrail. The parents were shaken but okay. The newborn, swaddled in a blue blanket, was in the NICU, his tiny life hanging by a thread. Ben vomited. He saw the direct, horrifying line from his turn of the key to that incubator. He had not just accepted the box's economy, he had become an active participant. He had placed an order for joy and delivered a package of despair. He couldn't live with it. Destroying the box felt wrong, it was a force of nature, an ancient law of balance given form. To break it might unmake something fundamental. But he could not let it continue to prey on the unaware. He brought the box to his workbench, not with tools, but with a new purpose. He understood its language now. It dealt in emotional energy. It needed input. He wound the key. As the familiar, heartbreakingly beautiful melody began, he did not make a wish. Instead, he made an offering. He laid his hands on the polished walnut and began to speak. He poured his own unresolved pain into it. The loneliness of his quiet apartment. The guilt over the newborn in the hospital. The grief for his parents, long gone. The 1,000 daily anxieties and regrets that he usually kept locked away. The music box resisted. The melody stuttered, a gear grinding in protest. This wasn't how it worked. It was designed to transfer energy between strangers, to keep its mechanisms clean and its operator innocent. Ben was flooding its pristine workings with the messy, complicated pain of its master. Take it. It's yours. You want sorrow? Here it is. But you take it from me. He pushed harder, mentally, emotionally. He gave it every dark thought, every fear, every ounce of his own humanity. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The box grew warm, then hot to the touch. The mother-of-pearl inlay seemed to glow with a faint, internal light. There was a sound, not a break, but a shift. A deep, internal ping, like a crystal glass settling into a new, permanent shape. The melody changed. The profound, haunting melancholy was gone. The notes were the same, but the soul of the music was different. It was now just a simple, beautiful, neutral lullaby. The mechanism had been recalibrated. It had learned to run on a single source. It had learned empathy. Ben still winds the music box. It sits on his mantle now, not hidden away. It plays its tune every evening. The world is no longer perfectly balanced. His sister's baby is healthy and beautiful, and the child from the accident recovered fully. The bakery was rebuilt by the community, stronger than before. The world is Messier, less predictable. His life has its struggles. And he wouldn't have it any other way. He hadn't broken a curse. He had tamed a fundamental force. He had taught a cosmic instrument that the most sustainable source of energy is not transfer, but transformation. That we must balance our own scales. There is a unique alchemy to scent. It's the closest thing we have to a time machine. A single note can unlock a memory buried for decades. For Clara, an archivist who lived surrounded by the dusty ghosts of other people's pasts, scent was a sacred thing. Her small apartment was a library of smells, old paper, binding glue, lemon polish, and a particular, comforting scent of history. Her latest acquisition came from an estate sale for a reclusive perfumer. Amongst beautiful, empty bottles was a simple, unlabeled jar candle the color of cream. The attached tag, written in a spidery hand, read, "For the weight you no longer wish to carry." Intrigued, she lit it that evening. The scent that unfurled was indescribable. It was rain on dry earth, yes, and old, leather-bound books. But underneath that was something else. Something uniquely, painfully hers. It was the scent of the lavender soap her mother always used, the one they'd buried her with. It was the smell of the oil her father would use on his violin bow. It was the scent of the night-blooming jasmine outside her childhood window. And as the scent filled the room, the sharp, aching grief associated with those memories, softened. It didn't vanish. It became a story in a book, rather than an open wound. She felt lighter. Unburdened. She slept a deep, dreamless sleep. She didn't know that with every breath of that scented air, she wasn't just soothing the memory, she was gently erasing it. The candle wasn't offering comfort. It was offering amnesia. And it was the most dangerous gift she had ever been given. Because the heaviest weights we carry are often the ones that make us who we are. And the most tempting offer is to simply put them down. Night after night, Clara returned to the candle. Each burning session was a gentle shedding of skin. The piercing grief for her parents became a soft, nostalgic melancholy. The embarrassment of a childhood failure became a neutral anecdote. The lingering anger from a past betrayal simply evaporated. Her life became easier. Lighter. She was more productive at work, more present in conversations. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been her baseline for years was gone. The candle was a miracle. A reset button for the soul. But the candle was hungry. The more she burned it, the more it demanded. A 1-hour burn softened a memory. A 3-hour burn made it hazy, like a photograph left in the sun. She began to crave that emptiness, that pristine quiet in her mind. She started leaving the candle burning while she read, while she cooked, while she slept. The cozy ritual became an addiction. She was no longer Clara, a woman with a past, both good and bad. She was becoming a clean, smooth, empty page. And the candle's flame was the eraser. The first sign of true danger was when she met an old friend for coffee. A woman she'd known since college. They laughed about a wild party they'd gone to, a night that had ended with them getting hopelessly lost. Clara could see the memory in her friend's eyes, could hear the laughter in her voice. But for Clara, it was like reading a synopsis of a movie she'd never seen. The memory was gone. Erased by a night she'd burned a candle to forget a stressful day at work. A cold terror cut through the chemical-induced peace. What else had she lost? She frantically paged through her old journals. Entries that should have sparked vivid recall were just words on a page. The memory of her first kiss. Hazy. The song her father used to sing to her. Gone, melody and all. She extinguished the candle and took it to a lab. The analysis was baffling. The wax was infused with a complex blend of essential oils and something else, a rare, mineral-based compound that acted as a targeted neurosuppressant. It didn't damage the brain, it simply walled off specific memory pathways, like a librarian quietly locking away certain shelves. The candle wasn't magic. It was a precisely engineered weapon against the past. And she had been willingly poisoning herself with it. Clara knew she couldn't just throw the candle away. The memories were still in there, locked away. She had to break the seal. But how do you fight a thing that has made you forget why you should fight? She didn't have an antidote. She had only a theory. If the scent could suppress, then perhaps its absence could provoke. She took the candle to the place where her strongest memories lived, her childhood home, now empty, waiting to be sold. She didn't light it. She simply sat on the bare floorboards of her old bedroom, the unlit candle between her knees. She closed her eyes and she fought. She grasped for the ghost of the jasmine scent outside the window. She strained to hear the echo of her father's violin. She reached for the feeling of her mother's hand. It was agony. Like trying to move a limb that had fallen asleep. But slowly, painfully, like a radio tuning through static, things began to break through. A note of the song. The pattern of the wallpaper. The crushing, beautiful, wonderful weight of her grief for her parents. It was all flooding back, not as a gentle stream, but as a tidal wave. She didn't suppress it. She let it wash over her. She wept for hours on that dusty floor, welcoming back the pain because it was proof of the love. The candle hadn't been making her happy, it had been making her empty. And she chose the beautiful, painful mess of her history over the pristine prison of peace. Clara kept the candle. She placed it on a shelf, unlit. It was no longer a tool for forgetting, but a monument to remembering. A reminder that our scars are our maps, and our burdens are often the things that give us our strength. She had not defeated a cursed object. She had rejected a seductive lie. She had learned that healing isn't about deleting the past, it's about integrating it. About making peace with the ghosts, not evicting them. So the next time you seek comfort, ask yourself, are you looking to heal, or to forget? What memory are you trying to escape? And what part of yourself would you lose if you succeeded? Tell me in the comments below. And make sure you're subscribed. Because our next journey into the cozy and the strange begins with a teacup. A beautiful, china teacup that is always full of the perfect brew. But every time you drink from it, you don't just taste tea, you taste a moment from a stranger's life. The case of the empathy teacup. What happens when you drink too deep, and can't tell whose memories are yours anymore? Until then, cherish your past. All of it.